On the 4th of August 2020, at 6:08 in the evening local time, a warehouse at the Port of Beirut released an energy equivalent to roughly 1/10 of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The shockwave shattered windows 30 kilometers away. The material that did that had been sitting in Warehouse 12 for 6 years. Port authorities knew it was there. Customs officials had written about it. Judges had been petitioned, and not one of those letters produced a single action. 11 minutes from now, we're going to read the exact sentence from a 2014 Port Authority letter that asked for the ammonium nitrate to be removed, a letter that went unanswered and was then forgotten, while 2,750 tons of explosive-grade fertilizer waited. To understand how this happened, you need to go back not to 2020, but to 2013, and to a ship called the MV Rhosus. The Rhosus was a Moldovan-flagged general cargo vessel, 23 years old, operating under what the maritime industry calls a flag of convenience. In this case, Moldova's open registry, which allowed her owner, a Russian-Ukrainian businessman named Igor Grakushkin operating out of Cyprus, to minimize regulatory scrutiny and labor costs. That is a perfectly legal arrangement. Much of the world's merchant fleet operates this way. In late 2013, the Rhosus was chartered to carry ammonium nitrate from Batumi, Georgia, to Mozambique. Ammonium nitrate is a fertilizer. It is also, under the right conditions, one of the most powerful industrial explosives in existence. The cargo was 2,750 tons of it, loaded in bags, loaded by a company called Savaro Limited. The voyage should have gone south, around Africa, and into the Indian Ocean. It did not. In late 2013 or early 2014, accounts vary. The ship made an unscheduled stop at Beirut. The official reason given was that the owner could not pay port dues elsewhere and needed to take on additional cargo to fund the voyage. But the Rhosus arrived in Beirut in poor enough condition that Lebanese port inspectors detained her on safety grounds. Grakushkin, facing mounting costs he could not or would not pay, abandoned the ship. The crew, 6 Ukrainian and Russian sailors, were left aboard for months without pay, unable to leave because port authorities required the ship's captain to be present during any investigation. That detail matters because it is the moment the Rhosus stopped being a maritime problem and became a Beirut problem. By late 2013, Lebanese customs had a genuinely difficult situation on their hands. A detained ship, an absent owner, a crew in legal limbo, and 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate that nobody was claiming. The relevant international framework here is important. The Nairobi International Convention on the Removal of Wrecks was adopted in 2007 and came into force in 2015. It gives port states legal authority to remove abandoned vessels that pose a hazard. Lebanon never actually ratified the Nairobi Convention. But even if it had, there's a gap in the convention that matters enormously. Nairobi covers the wreck, the vessel itself. It says almost nothing about the cargo. That gap is not an accident of drafting oversight. It reflects a genuine disagreement in international maritime law about who owns responsibility for hazardous cargo once the ship that carried it has been abandoned. The flag state, the cargo owner, the port state, the consignee who never received it? In the Rhosus case, Savaro Limited, the company that loaded the ammonium nitrate in Batumi, appears to have simply gone quiet. They did not pursue the cargo. They did not arrange insurance recovery. They disappeared from the paper trail. Lebanese customs authorities wrote to the ship's captain and to relevant government ministries multiple times between 2014 and 2017, requesting guidance on what to do with the material. The responses, where they came at all, bounced between departments. Judges were petitioned. Specifically, Customs Director Shafiq Merhi submitted at least 6 letters to the judiciary between 2014 and 2017, explicitly warning that the ammonium nitrate posed a safety risk and requesting either export, sale to a domestic buyer, or handover to the Lebanese army. In 2014, Port Authority officials wrote to Lebanon's public prosecutor asking for the cargo to be moved. The letter described the conditions in the warehouse as inadequate for long-term storage of a material of this sensitivity. No one moved it. The ammonium nitrate was offloaded from the Rhosus at some point in 2014 and placed into Hangar 12, Warehouse 12, at the Port of Beirut. The warehouse was not purpose-built for hazardous material storage. It had no climate control system designed for ammonium nitrate. Its roof was compromised. Lebanese investigators who examined it after the explosion found evidence that it had been used to store fireworks as well in an adjacent section, though the precise arrangement of materials inside remains contested. What is not contested is that several inspections of the warehouse took place over the 6-year period. Port Authority inspectors noted the deteriorating conditions. Lebanese customs officials noted them. In 2019, the General Security Directorate specifically flagged the risk in an internal report. That report reached senior officials within the Lebanese government. And here is what makes the Beirut case different from a simple accident. It was not invisible. The hazard was documented repeatedly by people who had the authority to act. The failure was not one of detection. It was one of accountability, compounded by a legal framework that offered no clear owner for the problem. Lebanon in 2014 through 2020 was also navigating severe political dysfunction. The country went through multiple caretaker governments, a parliamentary deadlock, and a financial collapse that began accelerating in 2019. Port administration sat in the overlap between multiple ministries, none of which had sole authority over hazardous cargo. The ammonium nitrate fell into that overlap and stayed there. If you've been tracking the legal question this whole time, who was actually responsible under international law? This is where it gets strange. Because the answer, genuinely, is unclear, and that unclarity was not fixed before August 2020 and has not been fixed since. On the afternoon of August 4, 2020, a team of workers was sent to Warehouse 12 to repair a hole in the door, a security concern because the port was worried about theft. Welding equipment was brought in. The ammonium nitrate in the warehouse was not uniformly stored. 6 years of exposure to a leaking roof, humidity, and poor ventilation had caused some bags to cake and degrade. The precise ignition sequence is still reconstructed from forensic evidence and witness accounts because the blast destroyed most of the primary evidence along with the warehouse itself. What investigators and forensic analysts believe is this: sparks from the welding ignited either fireworks stored in the building or some other flammable material. A fire began. The fire burned for approximately 37 minutes, during which time a first, smaller explosion occurred, visible on security camera footage recovered afterward, a red-brown cloud characteristic of ammonium nitrate deflagration. Then, at 18:08, the main detonation. The blast measured 3.3 on the Richter scale at monitoring stations across the region. The pressure wave was recorded by infrasound sensors in Cyprus, Turkey, and parts of southern Europe. The port was obliterated. The surrounding neighborhoods of Mar Mikhael and Gemeze, among the most densely inhabited parts of the city, were gutted. Over 200 people died. More than 6,000 were injured. Around 300,000 were displaced from homes that were damaged or destroyed. The grain silos adjacent to Warehouse 12 partially absorbed the blast and saved parts of the city from worse damage. Those silos, which have since partially collapsed, have become a contested monument to the event. Up to this point, every account of Beirut agrees on the broad sequence. After this, they don't. And what they don't agree on is the part that matters most for what comes next. The Lebanese investigation has been mired in political obstruction since 2020. Judge Tarek Bitar, appointed to lead the inquiry, sought to question senior officials, including former prime ministers. He was suspended from the case multiple times following procedural challenges filed by those very officials. As of the time this script was completed, no senior figure has faced trial. But the Beirut explosion exposed something beyond Lebanese governance failure. It exposed a structural gap in the international system for managing abandoned hazardous cargo. The Nairobi Convention's scope is vessels. When a ship is abandoned, a port state party to the convention has a legal pathway. It can declare the vessel a wreck, establish the registered owner's liability, and compel removal. But cargo, particularly cargo that has been separated from its vessel and placed in shoreside storage, exists in a different legal regime entirely. Hazardous goods regulations under the International Maritime Dangerous Goods Code, the IMDG code, govern the transport phase. They do not create a clear liability chain for what happens when cargo is abandoned at a port. The Institute of International Law and the IMO's Legal Committee both flagged the cargo liability gap in sessions following the Beirut explosion. Peter Mackay at the International Group of P&I Clubs noted in a 2021 submission that the absence of a unified instrument addressing abandoned hazardous cargo in port represents one of the more significant unresolved exposures in maritime law. No convention has been adopted to address it, which means the conditions that produced Beirut, an abandoned ship, orphaned cargo, a liability gap, and an administrative system with no clear owner, are not unique to Lebanon. Here is the line. About 11 minutes ago, I said we'd get to it, and this is it. In November 2014, Customs Director Shafiq Merhi addressed a letter to the President of the Beirut Court of Appeal. The letter described the ammonium nitrate as material that was, in his words, dangerous and could destroy Beirut if it detonated. He requested that it be sold, exported, or handed to the Lebanese army. The letter went unanswered. That sentence, could destroy Beirut if it detonated, was written 6 years before the 4th of August 2020. It was written by an official who had no authority to act unilaterally, who followed every correct bureaucratic channel, who put the warning on paper, and who watched nothing happen. The Rhosus' owner, Igor Grashushkin, settled a civil claim and was ultimately not held criminally liable in any jurisdiction. The company that loaded the cargo in Batumi, Savaro Limited, has never been publicly identified as having faced legal consequences. The flag state, Moldova, had no mechanism to compel action on cargo that had been offloaded from its registered vessel. The Lebanese officials who received the warnings are being investigated, but that investigation has been obstructed. This is what a legal gap looks like in practice. It does not look like a loophole that sophisticated actors exploit. It looks like a warehouse where everyone sent a letter and nobody had the authority to do the last step, and 2,750 tons waited in the heat for 6 years until a welder closed a gap in a door. The Port of Beirut has partially reopened. Grain ships call there again. The footprint of Warehouse 12 is still visible in satellite imagery. And the IMO's legal committee is still discussing how to close a gap in international maritime law that Beirut made impossible to ignore, and that has not yet been closed. If this kind of investigation sits right with you, the kind where the system failure turns out to be invisible until it isn't, this channel exists precisely for that. Subscribe, and the algorithm will actually make itself useful for once. The seas keep moving, even through the wreckage. If this got you, the next episode on this channel is about the economics of maritime salvage, specifically who owns a ship that nobody wants, and how a small industry built around that question quietly keeps global trade from collapsing one stranded vessel at a time.